My name is Miao Fenzhen. I'm faculty member at. No, you will not hear the voice. That's for the purpose of a film recording. I'm in the Department of East Asian Languages, Literatures, and Culture, and it's my pleasure to be here with you. It's late afternoon right now, and we know that it's supposed to be everyone's low energy level, but we have this high energy in this room. Thank you so much for your participation and presence today. I'm particularly appreciative of your presence here. For me, it's a strong token of great effort and great viability that shows how vibrant our world language community is at UVA. Thank you so much. And as you know, we have two special honorable guests today who are sitting next to me. Dr. Nina Garrett from Yale University, and also Dr. Sue Otto from University of Iowa. I will introduce their background a little bit. And before we started our event today, as you know, we have created a full-day compact schedule for them. I'm hoping you do not feel too much exhausted. And I sincerely apologize for that. As you know, we want to fully utilize your expertise and get the most out of it when you are here. And there are a couple of members of faculty members and staff members that have met with them this morning and early afternoon. I want to deliver my thanks to them. They are Professor Emily Shida and Professor Chetan Nepali, Professor Xinxian Liang, who's not here yet, and Professor Karen James, and Professor Ran Zhang, and also Dr. Judy's Garrett. She should be here pretty soon. And I also want to take this opportunity to say thanks to Dr. Valerie Larson and also her great team to help us organize today's event at their territory and their land. We know Valerie and her team have done a phenomenal job to support foreign language teaching and learning at UVA, including technology initiative. Okay, about today's event, today's talks and panel discussions has totally 90 minutes. That will be divided into 3 parts. We have 2 presentations, and each presentation is 30 minutes. And these 2 presentations will be followed by a 30-minute Q&A session. Okay, and the 2 panel presenters will review the changing phase of language technologies from the traditional language lab to present the language centers. And we'll imagine the future of language centers and the role of technology in language learning. In the first presentation, Dr. Garrett will present a historical overview of the evolution of language centers and their space in language teaching and learning. In second presentation, Dr. Otto will continue with a review of new trends in technology, higher education, and second language acquisition, and will present a vision of future language learning spaces. It's my biggest privilege and honor to introduce our very first distinguished speaker, Dr. Nina Garrett. I know what I'm going to say and introduce means so little in comparison with her substantial contribution to foreign language teaching and learning and technology initiative. But please allow me to take 1 or 2 minutes to briefly highlight her achievement. Dr. Nina Garrett holds her PhD from University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. That happens to be the university that I graduated from. She has been president of the International Association for Language Learning Technology and president of the executive board of the Computer Assisted Language Instruction Consortium. From 1998 to 2007, she served as Yale University's first Director of Language Study and Director of the Center for Language Study, which provides leadership, professional community, resources, technology support, and program evaluation for the teachers of over 15 languages at Yale. She retired from Yale in 2007. Yeah, but continues to consult, publish, and speak on the relationships among language acquisition theory, language pedagogy and technology, with particularly emphasis on providing a psycholinguistically sound basis for pedagogy and digital materials development and the potential and challenges of language centers in post-secondary institutions. The abstract of her topic basically would centers upon the C. I think I have introduced that a little bit, right? Okay, so now let's welcome Dr. Nina Garrett.
Okay, I have to tell you, first of all, because you'll be wondering, this Bobsy twin effect was completely coincidental. We bought from the same catalog, but totally independently. We had a hysterical moment of recognition in the lobby this morning. I promise you. I mean, we've known each other for 35 years, but we did not consult about what we were wearing. Right. My topic is the evolution of language centers, but I want to make it clear that I'm not talking about the evolution of the technology per se, and in fact, not even so much about the evolution of the spaces. That's much more something that Sue can tell you about in more detail. I should perhaps say that as far as the evolution of the technology is concerned, my experience with it was Wallensack reel-to-reel tape recorders. And that went through things like the mainframe computer system of Plato before we got to today's world. So I have witnessed this evolution, but that's not really what I want to talk about today. It seems to me that there's such an enormous range of possibilities for language centers like the Institution for World Languages that you are privileged to be starting up here. But different institutions will, of course, want or be able to realize only some of those possibilities. So when I talk about anything specific to the Yale situation, I want you to understand that I'm not necessarily, recommending or setting any kind of goals for any particular institution where they should be specific to the culture of the institution where they happen. There's no one-size-fits-all recommendation for how language centers might evolve, but there are a lot of possibilities. Sue may see things very differently from the way I do, and I hope that she will contradict me when her turn comes. The pedagogical rationale for the uses of technology has changed so much over the years, but in sometimes very subtle ways. The original language lab that we had with tapes starting in the early 60s, really, was instituted with a kind of tacit sense that it realized the possibility of practice. And I want to emphasize this as being as important conceptually, because practice is different from learning. And so a space which is set up and a technology which is set up to organize practice means that the understanding was that the students would be learning in the classroom and practicing in the lab, not learning anything new in the lab space. At that point in time, the notion of practice was very much undergirded by the pedagogical concept of behaviorism, so that the concept of immediate feedback was considered really essential in the setting up of habits, and the pedagogical materials that we were dealing with back in those days were really the ones that were set up by the audiolingual materials, the ALM sort of philosophy, which was very behavioristic in its approach. So the notion really was that the students used the language lab as a way of providing extra time on task, that is, practice that could be extended to time outside the classroom sphere. It was considered to be a better way of doing homework, but basically, the materials were still just workbook exercises, even if they were now audio-based rather than workbook page-based, with the same kind of pedagogical expectation underlying them. Early computers, when we got around to that point, weren't in the language labs, because the language labs were conceived of as places where audio happened. And there was sometimes the faculty who were interested in developing foreign language software, they would have a couple of computers in the back of their own classroom, but they weren't in the language labs. The labs simply were not set up for the computers. And they served, pedagogically speaking, the computers in the back of the classroom served a number of interesting purposes back in those days. For example, in many cases, the institution wasn't capable of scheduling a level 3 and a level 4 in certain of the languages, the less commonly outside of the big 3, Spanish, French, German, so that having a computer in the back of the class was a way to split the class. Level 3 would be working with the teacher while level 4 was on the computer, and then vice versa for half the class. We also had the capability of dealing with students at a more individual level. So some more advanced work could be done on the computer while less able students were getting remedial help from the teacher and so on. So this kind of pedagogical notion was very much present in the configuration of the early setups of the computers. Meanwhile, of course, the teachers were trying to develop software. And back in the early 80s, there wasn't a hell of a lot of support for this. It was very much an individual and out in front kind of effort. So that was labeled originally computer-assisted language instruction, CALI, but that quickly modified to CALL, computer-assisted language learning, with the emphasis changing, obviously, from a focus on the instruction to a focus on the learning. But early CALL was all what we would call tutorial CALL, with the notion that it was still practice. It was designed for tutoring the student through a certain kind of activity which had already been taught in the classroom, with still workbook exercises, with no really serious exploration of the value of what was popularly referred to as drill and kill. So when you started asking questions about what the value of the workbook exercise was, besides the sort of simplistic assumption that, oh, well, extra time on task is always a good thing, when you start exploring what's actually happening in the learning process, which, for my sins, I did in my dissertation on the Plato system, what emerged was that immediate feedback with the concomitant requirement that the students correct what they're doing. They put in some utterance on the computer and they get immediate feedback as to where the errors are, usually underlining or something like that. Some with dasher making blank spaces with the dashes and so on. Then the student is supposed to try again and to get some kind of correction and so on. It turns out that if you look at the exercises that you find in most textbooks and in most workbooks that go along with the textbooks, the expectation is that the student is choosing between two forms. It may be the imperfect versus the present perfect. It may be the indicative versus the subjunctive. It may be the dative case versus the accusative case. No matter how the language actually works, in any given exercise, students are supposed to be practicing this alternation. What's the difference between these two forms? When is one required and when is the other required? It turns out, if you really look at this in some detail, that immediate feedback and correction tells the student that one was wrong. And the student says, oh, okay, if it isn't X, it must be Y. And they put in the other one. With serious questioning following, what have they actually learned from this? I dubbed this, somewhat pretentiously, the binary correction hypothesis. And I think it's still valid. If we look at the kinds of materials that are set up for this kind of tutorial work, this is a basic pedagogical problem, which very few publishers are asking when they ask someone to create a workbook that goes with a textbook, whether the workbook is audio-based, video-based, whatever, as long as the student input is this, oh, well, if it isn't X, it must be Y, there's questionable learning happening. So after a time, there was a much greater shift from the concept of technology work being basically for practice to its notion of its being basically for learning, i.e. the notion that computer-assisted language learning was actually teaching something that wasn't being done in class or was being just barely introduced in class and could then be learned outside of class on the technology. And this is, I think, this is to me an extremely important change. And I think it's worth thinking about in terms of every move that we make as the technology gets more sophisticated. What happened really was that the notion took form, took precedence, that what could get left out of classroom work was the teaching of grammar. That is, a basic concept might be introduced in the classroom, but it was the teaching of grammar, the actual practice of grammar, was supposed to be happening on the computer. Now, this happened simultaneously. Now, I could go into a long disquisition here, but I promise I won't. This happened simultaneously with the shift in foreign language pedagogy, which was based on the shift in second language acquisition theory, away from a more strictly cognitive and individual learner model to a much more sociolinguistic and communicative model. So as the teachers were becoming more and more pressured to teach more and more communicatively, then the pressure was on getting grammar and this kind of cognitive mastery out of the classroom and, ipso facto, onto the computer. So there was this synchronicity of the growing capacity of the technology and the development of second language acquisition theory. There are, of course, multiple schools of second language acquisition theory. As the introduction mentioned, I've been more in the, you could call it psycholinguistic school. I'm really interested specifically in the cognitive mastery of structural elements in the language. I happen, you'll laugh, but okay, I think teaching grammar is more fun than anything else. And so I'm very much concerned with the interaction inside a learner's head. Obviously, a great deal of language gets learned in the process of communicative interaction with other learners, but there is a certain amount of understanding of how the language works that happens cognitively inside the head. How do these two things balance? If you have a situation in which all of the cognitive work happens outside of class, then you may have a problem with the learning of some of the syntactic concepts of the language. And of course, the more different the language is from English, the more difficult it is to master those concepts. So languages that have a complicated case structure, for example, where most native speakers of English assume that English has no case structure. Obviously it does, but it's not visible in the way that it is in foreign languages. So the whole balance of what gets taught and practiced and learned in the classroom with the interaction of the teacher with the students, where you have the teacher doing the tutorial work, as opposed to shifting all of that outside of the classroom, is a pedagogical issue that we still need to deal with. We deal with it differently in different languages. Again, there's no one size fits all. But the sociolinguistic and communicative school has really taken over second language acquisition theory to the point where it's actually fairly unusual. If you read through the lists of tables of contents of second language acquisition journals, you very rarely find anything on psycholinguistics anymore, which troubles me. So the notion is really that the grammar can be handled a little bit by the textbook explanations, which are often set off in the communicative. Remember the purple pages?
Oh, of course.
Right. The German textbook in which grammar was on purple pages at the back of the textbook.
They were in the middle of each chapter.
They were in the middle of each chapter. Okay, but definitely, grammar was different from communication, and that it's still very often seen that way by a lot of pedagogical materials. That so then elaborated on and learned in software outside of class. There was even a period during which, and I dealt with this a lot, teachers were punished for teaching grammar. Just inconceivable. Leave that to the software. Use all of the classroom time. Free up classroom time for communicative activities. Meanwhile, especially in the early, even the middle stages, call materials were being developed not by teachers, not by the textbook authors, but by techie developers. So you would have a textbook written by a teacher or a team of teachers, and you would have the ancillary materials for the computer written by somebody else. Typically, a techie developer who had once upon a time had this language. That was the early authoring environment. As the technology became more and more sophisticated and the teachers recognized what could be handled pedagogically by the technology, they began to rebel against this kind of ancillary materials writing and wanted to be able to do that themselves. So the development of professional development for the teachers became very often a matter of taking over the development of the technology materials, for which, of course, none of them had ever been prepared. So professional development workshops, there were many funded by individual universities, funded by the Mellon Foundation, funded by the Department of Education to train foreign language teachers to develop their own materials. There was a lot of development of tools for doing this, and a huge amount of time and effort went into it. But doing that, interestingly enough, required teachers to think about their pedagogy in a way that they'd never been asked to think about it before. And I found this long before I went to Yale and in other positions that I had, where I found that most of the foreign language teachers came out of two schools. One, they were native speakers of their language, and they had learned through long, hard experience to be expert teachers of that language, but they started simply as native speakers without pedagogical training. The second school is Americans who had taken some kind of advanced degree, a master's, maybe a Master of Arts in Teaching, maybe a PhD in the language, which meant specifically a PhD is in the literature of the language with rare current contemporary exceptions. And they may have been TAs at one point, which in the early years used to consist of being handed a textbook and pushed into the classroom through the door with no pedagogical training at all. So being asked to think about the pedagogy in terms of what do I really want the technology to do for my pedagogy was a really serious challenge. And out of that challenge arose the kind of centers for language study and the preparation that leads to this kind of thinking that leads to the development of an Institute for World Languages. So the development of the second language degree programs, second language acquisition degree programs in the, what are we talking, middle 80s? No.
Well, ours started in 2000, but we weren't the first.
Yeah, there were a couple around the country. Flair at University of Iowa, Slate at the University of Illinois, SLAT at the University of Arizona, and there are others where there's a real emphasis on advanced degree programs that combine second language acquisition theory with the uses of technology and the pedagogy. And at this point, the financial support for teachers who were wanting to develop their own materials came out of the Department of Education, summer grants, workshops specifically for less commonly taught languages in which there are virtually no materials. In fact, the first teaching job that I had to develop all my own audio materials in German, because in those days there were tapes for French and Spanish, but there weren't any for German. So I just created them. This was on the Wallensack reel-to-reel. Meanwhile, the technology itself was developing by leaps and bounds. At first, we were constrained by the fact that what you saw on the screen didn't represent the actual text. I mean, how many of you have actually heard the word WYSIWYG? What you see is what you get. That was a big deal in the development of computers. True multimedia, not just the early, hugely expensive, hugely clunky efforts, but real multimedia in which you could do things in real time on the spur of the moment. I remember asking an information technology person whether we could have audio on demand for foreign language teachers. Certainly, he said, just let me know what you want and I'll download it the night before. So, I mean, that was the notion, that was audio on demand. And in fact, in the early days, there was so little understanding, now we're talking mid-'80s, there was so little understanding of the importance of thinking through the pedagogy that one of the important leaders in the field who wrote some important articles, I'm talking John Underwood, actually said at a Calico conference, here, let me show you this that we can do with video discs. I have no idea what the pedagogical value is, but it's so cute I have to show it to you. Excuse me, this was a real problem. But the point I want to make is that with every leap forward of the technology capacity, there has been, and I think continues to be, a serious pedagogical regression, at least for a short period of time. From huge mainframes like Plato, which collected incredible amounts of data on student performance that the teachers never had any time or training to look at, to standalone microcomputers, as we used to call them, to networked microcomputers, intranets, to the internet and the web, every time we moved from one of these to the next, we lost something in pedagogical capacity. That is, especially when we moved to the web, at first there was no capacity for answer processing. Even once there was some very generalized markup facility that you could use, there was very little in the way of individualization of language learning. There was almost no data collection so that you could track learner history and understand in a research project, for example, how certain teaching and certain pedagogy was reflected in actual learning. So every time we move forward, what's happening now, for example, is we're moving to all of the handheld devices. Well, there's marvelous things you can do with these, as all of you have seen, I'm sure. But the ability to control the way students use those to make sure that learning is actually happening, and not just ordinary learning, but language learning, and that's different. That's something that we don't have on the handheld devices in the same way that we have had on networked computers, where we can really do individualized error analysis of what the students are producing and get back to them in such a way as to make sure that the learning happens. It's not just habit formation. Each time, of course, that we go through a leap and a regression like that, the pedagogy catches up and eventually pushes the new technology to become even more sophisticated in meeting our specific pedagogical needs. But the big difference nowadays with the budget crunches is that many institutions are dismantling their language labs, their language centers, and firing or reassigning their directors, because the argument is, oh, well, we've got all of these handheld devices and the students know how to use them, so why do we need space? What really happens is that we need, and wiser institutions like the University of Virginia, recognize that we have a different kind of need for the spaces that we really need to pay attention to. All of these problems with the technology have fed into the increasing recognition that a Center for Language Study or an Institute for World Languages is a center for a new kind of strength on campuses, and that is actually being realized across campuses, not just in the language departments. It used to be that at many institutions, the language lab was thought of as being, one of those places that has to take care of the kids that do the foreign language requirement, and who really cares about that? It's just one of those distribution requirements. Now I think language has become increasingly seen as something else. Oddly enough, there was a recognition in the 1990s on many campuses that language teachers and language technology centers, language labs, if you will, were actually the showcase for the institution seeking visibility for what it was doing with advanced work in the technology. Technology for language teaching and learning, oh, well, look at our foreign languages. Whereas before that, the foreign language programs had been kind of, oh, well, the understory of what happens intellectually in language and literature departments. But the technology, the language departments were the showcase. And that was an odd feeling for many of us. And it happened at a lot of institutions. And it's not uncommon for those people whose training it is in language labs, language technology centers, to become so well known for what they're doing on the advanced levels as to be asked to work in centers for teaching and learning for broader parts of the campus, not just the languages. Now the recognition is in the context of internationalization. That's been a big buzzword for a decade or two. But many other departments besides the language departments, and not just the humanities either, the professional schools want meaningful language work for their students because they are expecting them to become leaders in the international world in their field, be it engineering, be it public health, be it business, whatever. So that if we can make what we're doing visible to people in the other departments across the university and at professional school, graduate school level, not just at the undergraduate level, we have the possibility of making what we're doing here important to the campus as a whole. That seems to me to be extremely valuable and worthwhile. More and more departments and professional schools are asking for less commonly taught languages. They're also asking for courses in language for special purposes, i.e. Spanish for the medical school, Chinese for the business school, Indonesian for forestry and environmental studies. These demands, once they know that there's some place where they can direct them, like the Institute for World Languages, these demands will become more and more important and more valuable in the development of resources to serve our needs. There's also language across the curriculum. That's another kind of way of doing language for special purposes that have well-established centers on multiple languages, on multiple campuses. Testing of foreign languages is something that has become important for, say, Fulbright students in a whole variety of fields who need to show that they can handle work at an international level. So the evolution of the Language Center and its uses for thinking about how pedagogy gets translated into technology is an area in which the languages provide leadership for the entire campus. And I think that that is something that needs to be acknowledged when we talk about changing spaces, changing technology, changing teacher preparation, to take fullest advantage of the momentum that has been developing in foreign language teaching for years and years and years. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nina,
I didn't
for your
eat into your time, did I?
25-minute presentation.
Was it?
I haven't got a chance to
I'm
show
usually not good at that.
If you have questions or any comments, we encourage you to save them, and you can raise your questions, and we'll open the floor for discussion in our 30-minute section. Now let's move to our second presentation. Our second speaker is also someone that I truly admire in terms of her devotion, passion, and her contribution in second language acquisition and instructional technology. Dr. Sue Otto holds a PhD in Spanish from the University of Iowa. She's director of the University of Iowa Media Center, adjunct associate professor of Spanish Portuguese, and co-director of the FAIR Second Language Acquisition Doctor Program. She's past chair of the executive board of the Computer Assisted Language Instruction Consortium, and past president
Right after me.
and past executive director of the International Association for Language Learning Technology. For more than 35 years, she has devoted her research and development efforts to foreign language authoring tools, authentic video resources, and multimedia software. She teaches courses on multimedia and second language acquisition. Let's welcome Dr. Otto.
See if I can turn this on without turning the display off. So this is a great counterpoint. Even though we dress alike and we think alike, you will find out that I'm saying many of the same things that she does. But I use a lot of pictures. And I really wanted to talk about the present of our media center, our language lab, and where we're going on our campus. So this is the extent of what I look into the future. I'm not good at that, I have to say, but I've done it on any number of occasions to different effect. Our Language Media Center, our new facility, we moved into the business building. The business college moved into a grand temple building, and we got the cast-off 6-story concrete 60s building. And we had, well, here, let's go back. We had the Language Media Center in various places. In the basement, we had a 30-position Sony cassette lab, okay? Room 17, it's a language laboratory. On the first floor, we had a large open facility that had computers, video stations, audio stations, and small group rooms. And on the 6th floor, about 10 years after that, we started to have a faculty development, a multimedia development studio. So we're spread all over the building, okay? I like to think of it as, you know, having tentacles. Oh yeah, and the other yellow space is actually, we have a recording booth. So we have different functions in different areas. I'm astonished that we still have an audio lab. This is a Sonico Lab 100, which is a couple of steps down from the one that you have. It has these little toy things that double as recording units, essentially, where you can record and play back, and this the teachers can collect the digital recordings that happen. The teacher can pair students and so forth. We use the lab extensively for testing, for practice, for conversation, listening, comprehension, and pronunciation practice, primarily in English as a second language. This is what it looks like. This is the schedule for the audio language classroom. It's astounding to me that it's used as much as it is. This is true every week of the semester, and including weeks before the semester starts because of the testing that we do in that, and to some extent afterwards. So I would have predicted 10 years ago, we absolutely would not have a dedicated classroom with an audio lab in it, but here it is. We do. Our Language Media Center and our new facility, our new 20-year-old facility, always has been based on the notion of zoning, kind of. And we did it with modular Carroll furniture that technically could have been taken apart and reconfigured and so forth. Never happened. It's in the same place that it's always been in. We have new carpeting now and new machines, but it's pretty much the same kind of situation. You could tell there's a circulation. We have about a 6,500 title collection of media materials, most of it video, some of it software. And we circulate that to faculty, graduate students teaching that goes outside the lab, and to students who come in. We have a reserve system, and they can come in and watch media. Actual plastic artifacts, you know, cassettes, DVDs, that kind of thing. We have a large computer lab. We have an open part of the computer lab, and then we have an extended part of the computer lab that's in carrels that are in individual enclosed carrels. And we have video carrels. We have another Lab 100, a Sonico Lab 100 that's 16 position. And then in probably the most different thing that we did when we moved in, and the most forward-looking thing, this was due actually to Erwin Tschirner, who was a German professor we had at the time. He wanted his students to work together in pairs and small groups. So we did around the periphery small group rooms for students to work in. So we have 7 of them. Yeah. And those have turned out to be one of the things that, after Erwin left, didn't get used as much, but now are used more than many other parts of the lab now. So we have an open computer lab. It's a nice lab. The computers belong to the central IT organization. They take care of troubleshooting them. We take care of monitoring and user support for it. It gets used as a computer classroom. So it's a multifunction kind of thing, this open part. We have a lot of hands-on instruction. Both our Spanish and our French programs have large ancillary packages that make up a large portion of the curriculum, actually. The Spanish program is actually a hybrid. They meet 3 times a week, and the other 2 times, the other rest of the time, the students are supposed to be working with my Spanish lab. So all of the materials that go, that are built into the textbook that are online. So it's a massive amount of material. All the quizzing is done through that, plus through our course management system. So there are a lot of materials online. They do a lot of online work and practice on their own. We also have computers and carrels. We're a Mac and PC thing, primarily PCs, but we also do Macs. We have the 16 position Sonico lab, looks like that. We have video carrels. There's anything I could tear out tomorrow, it would be the video carrels. We have video viewing, it's not the way it used to be. It used to be that all the video carrels were always busy. We had a lot of people who were invested in the use of authentic video materials, and at the time you could only get them on cassette. You didn't have the internet streaming things out the way it is now. So we had video disc players, we had VCRs, and then we started to have machines that had, or carrels that had DVD players in them. And as time has gone on, this has dropped off in everything except American Sign Language, who uses a lot of video. We have a lot of video in we have 3 drawers worth of reserve audio ASL materials for checkout. Anything that has to do with cinema, okay, and civilization courses. So they cover the whole range of languages, but really the video material, most of the video that happens is of the instructional type. The films, the documentaries and so forth get used in class, and there's a heck of a lot of stuff that goes on in the classroom for that comes off the web. So, and we have a big business these days in capturing little snippets of video for people to use. Because as you might know, when you use video for language learning particularly, if you get much beyond 1.5 to 3 minutes, it's too much. So if you're going to work intensively with something, you're going to work with a small quantity of it. So these could go tomorrow, and I would not care. We also have the series of small group rooms, and these have been great. They're multi-purpose areas. We have a DVD player, a multi-standard code-free DVD player in every one of them, a multi-standard VCR, because we still have some of those, even though we are in the process very much of weaning people away from the VCRs. The classroom support folks pulled all the VCRs out of everywhere except places where language faculty just revolted and said, "You're not taking mine away, I need it." So we have a video disc player that's really used to hold up the other players, and a computer. So in this particular room, we have a large screen video monitor that's used for video viewing. Okay, it's got cable. We have 24/7 Chinese and Japanese TV and other, cable TV, which is very nice. Lots of group work. People go in to work together, probably using a computer, usually. Conversation practice and testing. The French program has almost permanent reservation in the last, nice small group room because they hold conversation practice and testing regularly. It's booked, all the time. And exams. I'm going to be giving my doctoral exams in these rooms in the second week of April. They get used for MA exams, PhD exams, or makeup exams, all kinds of, situations where you might want a non-networked computer, because we can pull the network connection and people can use it for that. And then we do a lot of research related data collection for second language acquisition, and that happens in these spaces. So they've been really great. Most recent thing I bought for the small group rooms were 2 refurbished Sony PlayStation 3. You were talking about games. So this is these students are in an Asian Humanities Japan course. And I have this written, I should look at this. And I bought these because the Japanese instructor who teaches this course, teaches a course in English. There's a great deal of pressure on our campus to up the numbers of people who are in language classes. There's some sort of magic number of having, 300 students a year or whatever. And if you're teaching graduate courses and language courses and so forth, you don't get, it's not like the chemistry professor who has a 300-person lecture. They have no trouble with those numbers. We do. So the answer is teaching in English and teaching things like this course, which satisfies the Gen Ed International Studies requirement. And Kendall decided to do this because he wanted to expose his students to classical Japanese literature, right? And so what he has done is have them read certain pieces of Japanese traditional literature and then show how the tropes and the characters and so forth manifest themselves in popular Japanese culture. So anime, manga, video games. And Okami is one of those video games. It's beautiful. I have to say, I love this. I'm not a gamer, but you go in, the graphics are very Japanese, very beautiful. The aesthetic is just lovely. And the white wolf is a woman, a goddess, who is out to rescue the world from its having been sort of destroyed by this malevolent being. So this particular thing is a quest narrative that borrows from the ancient Japanese myths found in the Kojiki. I don't know this because I'm not in the course, but anyway, they read that for class, and then they come and do this. And so there are characters in the game that are goddesses or mythic characters from Japanese culture. Very, very interesting. We also have, that's probably me, we also have one called Samurai Warriors. That's a little harder sell, because if you look on the web, it's classified as a hack and slash or slash and hack, I don't know, kind of thing. But in this, he has people reading about the samurai and then how they are depicted in current culture. So it's quite interesting. I have to say that in 2006, we published an April Fool's version of our newsletter, right? Started out at the top, entire LMC staff announces retirement on April 1st. And we were all hacked off because David Skorton, who's now going to be the president of or director of the Smithsonian Institution, had left Iowa to go to Cornell to be the president. We were all mad because we loved David Skorton, right? So we were all going to just leave. Nobody believed that one particularly. And then the second thing was about video games. It was a joke, you know? These were video games that were popular then: Zelda, Twilight Princess, and Medieval 2, Total, what? I don't know what that is. It was a joke, but, you know, now it's not. And in 2006, I would have said this would always be a joke. But gaming is, in fact, one of the fastest growing areas for all kinds of instruction, not just in languages. It's very interesting work being done by Steve Thorne and Julie Sykes about place-based gaming. You know, there are some very motivating, wonderful things that can be done. And of course, what we're doing with the PlayStation 2s is interesting as well. I will be interested to see what the students say at the end, particularly the women, and particularly the women in terms of playing the samurai warrior. I don't know whether that will appeal in any way. Oh, I've got to turn off my computer. And then the worst thing about this, excuse me, I will be on tape forever turning off my cell phone, was that we promised to tear out two rows of audio carols to put in a coffee cart. And when people found out that this was a joke, they were so disappointed. We still have people say, you know, that was such a good idea. Obviously, people that don't use the audio. And the audio carols upstairs don't get as much use. They get used for simulated oral proficiency interviews. They get used for students doing little recordings. If they don't want to use Audacity, they get used for small classes, particularly the Russian classes meet there because they're smaller. But it's one of those situations that the social aspect of things is really quite important and interesting. We also have a multimedia development studio. There's a panoramic picture. It's not that huge a room, but it's equipped with computers and software with Macs and PCs, things to digitize materials, all of the help that we need. We have a half-time graduate student who works there, and then all of us from the Media Center go up there to do one-on-one training sometimes. So it's one of these things that people have keys. I remember Valerie was talking about somebody doing something with Camtasia, right? Or a recording or some transfer thing, and she was here half the night. We don't make that kind of commitment. We just say, here, have a key, have fun. Teach them how to do it. So it's been a very valuable thing for us. We have a lot of hours of usage of this and at very strange times, but people do use it for development of all kinds of instructional materials. Here are our general assignment classrooms. Every general assignment classroom is equipped with projection equipment. These are in Phillips Hall, so they actually have speakers in the ceiling because I was in on being able to design them. They have a teacher desk and a stack of equipment that includes a multi-standard code-free DVD player and a multi-standard VCR, soon to probably be toast. Who knows? But there are also plug-ins if you bring your own computer, okay? Here's a computer classroom, typical thing, you know, computers on desks, all facing the front. Both of these models really focus on a teacher-centered approach to instruction, okay? That's very, very traditional, and it still is the case in many places. So here we are, and like this fellow, you can imagine that I'm only able to look like 5 minutes into the future. So I want to just talk a little bit about what the trends are on our campus and what's kind of shaping what's going on for us. For the first thing, there's education reform. This has been happening for more than a decade, really. The move toward more student-centered, interactive, or active learning. that it's no longer the teacher-fronted sorts of thing where you talk at your students and then you ask a question, the student answers, and that kind of thing, which is quite the old way of doing things. Much more collaborative learning in teams and groups. That's the reality of what people do. They don't go out and work alone in most instances. Some people do, but most do not. So part of a good education is to learn to work together with other people. Interactive instruction exploration, it's kind of redundant there, and performance-based assessment. We've certainly seen that in languages. We no longer have discrete point tests, particularly, or not very many anyway. Almost all of what we do is somehow based on performance. New literacies. Literacies are very, very important. I have a whole talk that I could bore you with, it goes on for an hour, about the need for literacies. We have our digital natives, but they're not literate digital natives. Okay? They don't know how to analyze, select, judge, assess, combine materials. Okay? So that's information literacy. They don't know how to do that. How to present themselves on the web. A lot of people have been presenting themselves on Facebook and all of these other things, but when we teach students the importance of privacy and the way you want to present yourself and the way the consequences of not maybe presenting yourself in the correct way, that's part of an education as well. And the whole notion of global citizens. So that comes in with literacy, cultural literacy, cross-cultural literacy, and of course language literacy about languages and how to confront the foreign culture without judgmental attitudes, how to observe the foreign culture and to try to make sense of what goes on. That's all very important part of what we call new literacies. It's a very broad term. And then there are the approaches to second language learning, and Nina did a very nice job of an overview of this. Especially with technology, we started out with a very cognitive psycholinguistic end of things, where the learner is viewed very much as an autonomous individual. Okay, what goes on in here is the important thing. It's what happens internally and what the learner can learn by him or herself, confronting books or another person actually, or media. More recently, the sociocultural aspect has come in. This is more the notion of the learner as a social being, the importance of context, the importance of having interaction with other people, and that's how you learn many things, by this interaction, by scaffolding, by being with somebody who's a little better than you are, who makes an effort to do that. So both of these things apply. We have to, we do have to acknowledge that it's both a cognitive process and a social process. Language is very social. So if you leave that out, you're leaving out something pretty big. But if you leave out the individual, you're also not giving that its due. So when we think about new technology-rich spaces, what are we talking about? Talking about computer workstations still. As I was saying at lunch, about 15 years ago on our campus, and I understood that, Stan, that they have done this here, we talked about getting rid of all the public computer facilities on campus, the computer laboratories, and they just have print stations, and they haven't done it still. And it's still an important thing for our students anyway, because although most of them have mobile technologies, they don't always want to schlep all that stuff around. So they come into our lab, for instance, and use computer workstations. You need work areas for mobile devices. Everything is wireless nowadays. And you need places where students can plug in. We have benches in our hallways in our building, and they always get moved to the nearest outlet. So it's an important thing. Collaborative learning and meeting spaces. This is our small group rooms, okay? It's a good model to think about where you have students working privately. We have individual students go into these too. I especially see ESL people. They're in there with the ESL video and they have the course management system open and they're doing their homework and they have the video. And I've seen that with groups of people as well. They have a computer open up and something on the video screen and working collaboratively as a group. Private study areas. And our group rooms get used as private study areas. Our carols are pretty private, but the group rooms are probably that as much as anything. Classroom and tutorial spaces. Media viewing spaces, that's always nice. That's our small group rooms too. So we're talking about a space with multiple usage. Okay, that's a concept that's actually come in the not so small house, or the not so big house, which is a new trend in building, where you have spaces in your house that are used for a number of things. So you have an area that might have a table for eating, but is also your home office area or something. So multiple uses of the same space. And then you need digital media production facilities. As we've moved into the socio-cultural aspect of things, one of the things, and the literacy things, one of the things that happens with a student-centered environment is that students become creators. They have more responsibility for their learning. And part of what they are doing is creating things with each other that have to do with what they're studying. Presentations, videos, all kinds of things that come up. In my class, Multimedia and Second Language Acquisition, the students learn how to use a whole raft of different kinds of things, including how to use Google Maps for micro-writing, micro-publishing. They love that. It's really a fun thing. You can write in any language. There's no constraint in terms of the characters or whatever. And it works perfectly, and it's so much more interesting than saying what I did on my weekend. You have them do a Google Map, and make up a trip or make up a story and then have the Google map it out. I do VoiceThread, I do blogging, I do Audacity. That's sort of boring. But anyway, more web-based tools that are free that not only can the teacher use, but students can use when they're creating materials. And then soft seating for socialization. We have a small area of soft seating. It gets used a lot. Even gets used for napping some of the time. But mostly it's students hanging out before they're taking a test or something like that and just talking. So the University of Iowa just built in their main library, in our main library, a learning commons. Okay, the main library used to have, when I arrived in 1970, the main library's first floor was given over to the card catalog, the circulation desk, the help desk, the reference desk, I mean. And let's see, what else was there? The browsing room was there, because I worked there, and nothing else. And now they tore out, well, the card catalog's been gone for a while, but they essentially replaced them with computers so that people could search for things online, because everything is online now. So they gutted the main floor. They moved serials upstairs. They did this whole major revamp that has been just astonishingly popular. The library used to be a pretty lonely place, a little scary at night, because there really weren't that many people. And now it's open all of the time. The Learning Commons is open 24/7, and there are people there all the time. As usual, I didn't have time to go take pictures when it was not spring break, so you'll see a lot of these pictures with not very many people in them, because it's spring break. But generally, I will finish, yes. So what we have is computer workstations. This is all one area, so it's a zone thing again. We have tutorial spaces, okay? So stools are a really big deal for some reason. Other people like them, and I noticed walking through one building on a way over here, there's a lounge area that has stools and computer workstations. Mobile devices, this is, it was so funny. This is Vanessa Borillo, who is a French doctoral student, and she was down there, and you can tell she's spread out there. She has her laptop, okay, and her food, and her drinks, and all her stuff. And this is what it looks like times 100 when it's not spring break. We have students doing this. So we have soft seating arrangements with chairs, soft chairs that can move. The little handle on the back, you just pick it up and roll it. They're expensive, though, I tell you. There are group rooms, and these group rooms are really wonderful. They're beautiful. They're light. They have places for you to plug in so that you can display on the computer. There aren't computers there. We're expecting the students to bring their own computers. And they have this really nifty thing on the door that you can reserve. the rooms. We use little pieces of paper. I forgot to point that out. But it's one of those situations where you can reserve them, and groups of students can and do reserve them in advance, and there are some rules for that. But you can see the upper left picture is the long view. A lot of the space, a lot of it, is for group rooms, for collaborative learning, for active learning, for students working together. So these were students who were working that time. They were working, they were spread out all over. I don't know what they were doing. They weren't really using the technology. It was a collaborative learning space for them. There's a cafe there. So people have food and drinks around this stuff all the time. I get a little nervous at that myself. And there are classrooms. There are a couple of classrooms in the library. These pictures are of my classroom in Phillips Hall, in which I teach. And when we think about student-centered classrooms, we're not talking about rows of stuff like this, right? I saw a class going on the bottom part of the U, and everybody's chairs were pulled into a circle, little groups of students. And that's a natural thing for language students to do. And in these rooms, they're called TILE classrooms, stands for Transform, Interact, Learn, Engage. They have round tables, laptops, displays everywhere, whiteboards on every wall, pretty much, except for the windowed wall and the one part of the one with the door on it. So you can do all kinds of activities that involve groups. You can do clicker activities. You can do, individual presentations and so forth. It's hard to tell that there's a front of the room. Okay, very, very wonderful places to work. It has totally transformed the way I teach. I had a hybrid model for my course where one day they, spent making postings on a discussion board of the articles, and then the next day was a hands-on for the class. And I've totally reworked all of that back to face-to-face, and lots of group work for all the assignments and for the practice. So anyway, my final thing here, and I'm closing, is that, you can build it, but nothing will happen unless you have committed faculty. We have faculty who are very, very excited about technology, who are very excited about the TILE classrooms. In the first cohort of something like 30 people, 5 of them were language professors. 5. When you think about a university the size of the University of Iowa, where we have 1,500 professors, and you get, people applying to do it, when 5 of them are language teachers, that's an indication you have people who are interested in innovation and student-centered learning. So that's really important. But change. You also need the support personnel, and you have some very good ones here, to provide consulting and training, particularly people who know something about language learning. On my staff, everybody has been a language teacher except for the token male, for some reason or other, our guy who's an IT guy. And he has learned a lot of languages. He studied abroad. He's the only one of us who is fluent in American Sign Language. He's married to an Indian, so he knows Hindi. He's had some Chinese. He knows about language learning, okay? The rest of us are teachers, so it makes a difference. Development assistance, it's important to have a place where faculty and graduate students can go and get help, have access to equipment and software and all the things that you might need, but also where you can get help. And that there's somebody who takes care of the stuff, the machines, the collection, the whatever. So that's an important aspect of things. And troubleshooting and help for users on site. So these are all things that must be in place for you to move ahead with innovation with technology. And then the last thing, I always forget because I don't look at my script, the resources have to be there. Heard about these grants that Ren has one to do the hybridization of stuff. And there are other internal resources that give people the ability to spend time redoing their classes. It takes a lot of effort to do that. And it's not something that if you're really going to transform what you're doing with technology, it's not something you tend to do along with everything else you're doing. You need to do it during a summer or during a time when you have a course reduction or something like that. And that's part of the resources. So that is what we have to say.